Hey, sales leaders, listen up. It's not your job to have all the answers. It's about asking the right questions to get your team thinking. And that's straight from this week's guest, Mike Montague. He grew up in the Sandler sales world and knows that selling someone what they need and can afford isn't cheating. It's actually doing your job. But here's the kicker. If you're afraid of difficult conversations or too caught up in being liked, you're setting yourself up for failure. So Mike's got some straight talk on how exposure therapy and the right tactics can break that cycle. And yeah, online learning's awesome, but if you're not building disciplined behaviors, you're just spinning your wheels. Yeah, and Mike's a big fan of tough love coaching a la Dave Ramsey. So if you're ready for a dose of sales truth, hit play now. But before you go, join the conversation on LinkedIn and subscribe to our Coach2Scale YouTube channel. Let's go.
Welcome to Coach2Scale, how modern leaders build coaching cultures. I'm your host, Matt Benelli. Join me as we build a community of like-minded professionals who share the belief that effective coaching improves the performance of every team member. Our mission is to help leaders become better coaches. The Coach2Scale podcast is sponsored by Coachum, the world's first AI coaching execution platform that leverages evidence-based coaching to increase quota attainment. And with that, let's get started.
I'm really excited to sit down with this week's guest. He's been in sales and marketing his entire career. And I've known Mike Montague for 10 plus years from his Sandler training days. In fact, I've listened to hours and hours of episodes of Sandler's How to Succeed podcast that Mike hosted. Currently, he's the founder of the AI marketing agency Avenue 9. He's a writer, he's a podcaster, guest speaker, game show host, and fellow Pi Kappa Alpha brother. Coming to us from the heartland of America, Kansas City, Mike Montague. Welcome to Coach2Scale.
I forgot about the fraternity. Phi K there for all our pikes out there. That's great. And yeah, it's been a long time. It's fun for me to be a guest and fun for you to interview me because I think we've done the other way around.
Yeah, which is great. Yeah, I've listened to a bunch of your episodes. Yeah, and then yeah, it's interesting things you find out through LinkedIn, and then I know we talked about it, but yeah, that we have that Pi Kappa Alpha bond. Different schools, different times, but yeah, hey, it's a connection point, right? Mike, let's get right into it. As you know, we start with the MythBuster question. What's a myth when it comes to coaching, salespeople, sales leaders? Right, I know you've been around this world for many, many years. What's a myth that you hear time and time again that you believe is misguided or maybe even complete BS?
Well, I think there's a big one, and it may be obvious to most people, but I think it's still a main problem, which is that being a good coach is a lot like being a good salesperson. It's not about having the answers. It's about having the right questions. And I think that way too many managers want to tell people what to do, or way too many employees expect their managers to know what the right answer is. And in both cases, neither are great. No adult wants to be told what to do. And so coaching is not telling. It's helping people change their own.
So even if I know the answers as the manager, as the leader, as the coach, maybe I should just shut up, right? Because it's not about proving how much I know. It's about what type of questions can I ask to help the situation along. Would that be fair?
Yeah, exactly. Or help that person discover what the right answer is and teach them how to think. Because if they have to come to you for the answer every single time, you become the bottleneck. You become the firefighter and you have to put out the fires every time rather than training your coaches or employees to be mini yous, to be able to solve the problems themselves and clone yourself so everybody can think like you. The organization becomes a lot more powerful and you get results.
Yeah. Faster. So as a leader, we're achieving success through others, i.e. the people on our team. And so the more people who have the answers, I, as the leader, become less of a bottleneck, right? And great things can happen, right? Especially if I'm hiring people who are better than I am, which is the goal and also not hard to do. Would that be fair?
Yeah. And I think it leads me to another myth or favorite saying of mine that is the job of leadership really is to make yourself irrelevant. A lot of people go into leadership to make themselves feel more important or to have a bigger impact. And those aren't necessarily the right goals. If you think about the best coaches like you do all the time, whether it's Phil Jackson or Andy Reid or something, they can't go play all of the positions. Their job is to make that team so prepared that everybody knows what to do. If they got sick and didn't show up for the game, all the coaches would know the game plan. They could step right in. The backup players could go. Everybody could run their own drills. They're all going to get stretched and ready. Same thing in sales. I think if you're a frontline sales manager, your team should be executing at a high clip without you involved. That's the
Yeah,
ideal
we had,
situation.
I think his name was Kevin Martin. I was the guest who said this a while back. And he said, one of the key attributes or traits of an individual contributor as a salesperson is that you have to be selfish sometimes. But when you get promoted into leadership, you have to be selfless. So as a leader, I don't need to be the star of the show. In fact, I just need to be behind the scenes. If I'm doing everything right, I don't need to be there for the right things to happen. That's kind of what I hear you saying there. The leader does not need to have all the answers, and they certainly don't need to be the star of the show.
Yeah. And I'll add one more to that, which might take us to a next part of the conversation too, which is in a world with AI, which is where I spend most of my time now as an AI marketing consultant. You don't need to know the answers. We can ask ChatGPT what the answer is. What's more interesting is knowing what question to ask ChatGPT, right? Because a bad question will get you a bad answer. So if we ask, ChatGPT, write me a cold call script so that I can, get a new opportunity, it's not going to know what to write it about. And I think we can get answers so much faster now. The key is really going to be who can ask the best questions or who has the best strategy to get to the right answers and who can execute on them rather than being a know-it-all, right? It kind of changes the game when we have the all of human existence, the collective knowledge of every human who's ever lived at our fingertips. We don't need you to know anything.
We don't need you to know anything. I feel like I'm back in the Marine Corps when, my drill instructor would say, Benelli, we're not paying you to think, just freaking take the hill, just do it. So, okay, let's go to there. AI. So big topic, right? Huge topic these days. And you're right at the forefront of all that. How are the best sales leaders leveraging AI today? How are they leveraging it in a way that's impressing you?
I don't know if anybody has shared the Terminator versus Ironman analogy.
Not on the podcast yet. No, I know we've shared that on posts and social media, but it hasn't come here.
Yeah. So that's my favorite way to think about it, which is the Terminator in the Arnold Schwarzenegger movies is an autonomous AI robot from the future who is acting like a human and is set out to accomplish a mission. I think a lot of people in the sales world are working on that. They're working on like, how do I get an AI cold calling agent to do my dials for me and set appointments? So I just have to show up with the qualified prospect. And that's okay. That's one way to pursue things. Iron Man from the Marvel comics is a human being. Tony Stark is smart, intelligent, funny, witty. He's got $1 billion. He's got a lot going for him. He's very successful, but he wraps himself in technology with the Iron Man suit. And he has the Jarvis AI, which can provide him insights and information that he is not aware of as a human being. So, if there's a heat-seeking missile tracking him or something, and he's paying attention to something else, how would he know? Jarvis is going to say, hey, you might want to look over your left shoulder, right? And that way, to me, is a lot more interesting if you think about it as a sales manager and say, oh, well, I can't be everywhere all at once. I have 5 or 50 reps. I can't be on all of their calls all of the time, but AI can. And through coach.io could surface insights when you go to have the meeting with that rep and say, hey, on that call 3 days ago, they did something really great, or they did something that's going to be a problem in the near future that you need to address as a coach. That to me is a whole lot more exciting. We're empowering the human to be the superhero and the star of the show. And we're assisting them with abilities that they couldn't have without them.
Yeah, 100%. AI is empowering, right? And there's a lot of people, are we going to lose our jobs as salespeople because of AI? And, we've heard it said, and you've heard this multiple times, Mike, which is AI is not going to replace the salesperson, but it is going to replace the salesperson who doesn't leverage AI. And so I think that empowerment, how do we use it? What types of questions do we ask is the key. You get out of it what you put into it. Might be a good analogy there. And then I guess the last comment there is, so Tony Stark was Iron Man, huh? I thought Ozzy was.
That's right.
I am Iron Man. All right. So Mike, kind of going back a little bit about your experience with coaching, what's a core belief you have about sales that you believe that most salespeople could benefit from if they grasped it a little bit more firmly?
I think it's a line from one of the old Sandler books from about 10 years ago, but it said that, selling people that have a problem you can solve, the money to solve it, and the decision making authority to say yes is not cheating. That's the way sales should be. And to me, I think we all run into that. I think the wider we cast our net, and we all want more sales, but the more you want, the more greedy you kind of get with your prospects, and the more you want in the funnel, the more dangerous it becomes because you get unqualified people into it. And so we can have a lot of people that don't have one of those three, right? They have a problem and plenty of work at a big company or something, but they can't say yes because they're a frontline person instead of the decision maker. Or we can have a decision maker with a crap ton of money, but they don't care about the problem because it's somebody else's problem in the organization. And you can just run into challenges and challenges over and over again and really stress yourself out. You fall into that trap of convincing people and influencing people and thinking that we can change other people's mind, when it's a whole lot easier to go find somebody else that's already qualified and just sell that
I
person.
love it. Selling people what they need, who have the money to pay for it, and are willing to share who's involved in the process, isn't cheating. It's the way it's supposed to be. Actually, it's interesting. I thought you were going to go in a different direction there. We recorded a podcast recently where somebody said something like, selling people what they need isn't selling, that's order taking. And I immediately referenced my old boss who would say, Matt, if you're selling them exactly what they call for, like the empty chair can do that. Your job is to distinguish yourself from that. Is how do you make the problem bigger? How do you cross-sell and you upsell? But I think we're both saying the same thing here. Whatever it is, like you're asking them questions, back to the first point, to get them to open their eyes to what they may actually need, the problems they might have, come to grips with it, look it in the mirror, and then work together to solve it. We're kind of saying the same thing, right?
Yeah, I think that's the balance, though. I do think that's the other side of the coin. So in my perspective, qualification is missing in most sales organizations. The marketing qualified leads aren't really qualified. They just kind of filled out a form, and the sales opportunities aren't really qualified. We just need to get some stuff in the pipeline. And then we kind of leave all the problems to the end, right? Well, if they drop out of the funnel, that's all right. Or if it takes 9 months to close them because they weren't really qualified now, that's okay. At least we're in front of it. And we kind of want more swings than we do order taking. I agree with you. I think there are a lot of people that don't ask great discovery questions and don't help people realize that they have a problem. And that's kind of on the other end too. That would assume maybe that you're getting a whole bunch of sales too, if you're in inside sales and things. So for me, the magic comes, I think, as a leader and as a sales coach, in asking the right questions here about the opportunity. And your job as the salesperson is to ask that prospect about their problem to make sure you're getting the right thing. You're getting the right problem, the full problem. You're going to solve the root issue. You've got the budget and you've got everything lined up so that they can make the best decision possible. A lot of people think, decision is just about the decision maker. And I think in today's world, I don't know if you'd agree, Matt, there's not a decision maker anymore in anything past an impulse purchase. There's all kinds of influencers, committees. Everybody's got to check with everybody. And especially if you're in enterprise sales or selling some sort of SaaS software, we're going to get IT involved, and there's legal requirements and all this stuff, which is why salespeople can't be automated with the AI robot, right? Back to your point, it can't be the empty chair with an AI doing the job, because we got to build consensus across teams.
What's interesting is less than an hour ago, I was facilitating a session on the decision-making process with a client. And they brought up the fact that if you get to the ultimate decision maker, that guy or gal, whoever the last person is, if you get to them right away, it might be to your detriment, because you're assuming that they're going to make the decision. And you might find out after a few conversations, you might find out too late that they're not making the decision. They're going to be like, yeah, listen, I can make the decision, but it's going to be useless if I don't have buy-in from my team. So I need you to talk to these 5 people. And like, oh yeah. So almost anticipating that people don't, even the the head person. They don't make decisions in a silo. The team's going to be involved. You might want to even bring that up early if you're talking to the ultimate decision maker, right? Different conversation than we were having about this topic 10, 15 years ago.
Yeah. And I think to my point too, is actually, I think a prospecting message, which is we've all had those sales in our career when it felt like it was cheating, that it was too easy. And they're like, we have a huge problem. We have a blank check. Like, we need to get this done by the end of the quarter. Please help us. And you're sitting there thinking like, this can't be right, you know? But most of the time, we spend our efforts in sales trying to convince people who are not there to be that kind of person rather than doing the hard work of prospecting to go out and find more people who are in that.
Speaking on behalf of the 99% of the other people watching this, that may have happened, but I don't remember it. I remember if it was the smallest deal. I will say the smallest deals sometimes were just as hard or harder than the multi-million dollar deals. I mean, I busted my ass on it was like $32,000, which was a small deal for that group. You know, and that was just as hard as a $40 million deal, the size of the deal.
Well, we both spent many, many years in Sandler, and I would get calls from the internet for dog training because we were just Sandler training, you know, a different on the job training, physical training and stuff. And you know, one time a year, somebody calls up and like, hey, do you do sales training? We need some help. And I go, what? You got the wrong number.
Well, my grand dog's been staying with us, 80-pound Doberman puppy. His name's Romeo. He might jump into the scene here. So we need some dog training. I got to talk to my daughter about that. But all right, so like you've been doing this, unlike me, right? I came up in the family that no one knew what sales was. Like it was lower middle class, blue collar. Like, Matt, be a doctor, be a lawyer, be a fireman, be a policeman. Like something like that. Like when I went to sales, what are you doing? Is everything okay? What's wrong? What do you do every day? And no one knew. Unlike me, you grew up with a family, or your dad was in the business, right? And so you've been around, you've been hearing about this stuff since you were really young. If you think about it, what would you tell your younger self on the topic of sales and coaching? Like, how would you help that younger Mike Montague?
Well, I've thought about this a lot because I didn't go directly into it. So we haven't talked much about my sales chops or background yet, but my dad bought a Sandler training location here in Kansas City when I was a junior in high school. So I took my first sales training class between my junior and senior year when I was like 16 years old, before I had anything to sell. And I started listening to the old David Sandler cassette tapes over and over again. And I was fascinated. It was like a magic trick of psychology and this East Coast guy who's really funny, like a stand-up comedian, just roasting grown adult salespeople on their belief systems and stuff. And I was completely fascinated. But in my teens and 20s, I didn't think I could become a sales coach. I haven't ever sold anything. How could I, go into a business owner's office and be like, hey, here's what you should do with your sales team, and be a consultant. So I had a lot of head trash around it. In my 20s, I wanted to be cool anyway. So I was DJ Romeo on the radio and performing live and all kinds of stuff in my 20s. That got me into internet marketing and social media and stuff. And about the time I was 30, I realized that I'm walking into business owners saying, hey, here's what you should do with your website and your social media accounts. And I was like, oh, you idiot. It's the same thing. Like, you have knowledge that they don't know. They haven't spent 12 years studying sales psychology and reading all the books and listening to all the tapes and going to classes with my dad and nights and weekends and summer vacations and stuff. They are busy running their roofing company or trying to set up their medical software device company. They're not studying sales psychology. And that's when I finally was like, okay, I can do this. So my message to younger people, and I think younger leaders, is you have to kind of find your confidence in what you know and your experience, and leverage that for your unique position as credibility in the expert. Because I had a lot of imposter syndrome going into my next roles, which we can talk about here in a second. But from there, Matt, I wrote a book on LinkedIn, which got the attention of the CEO of Sandler, took a job at the corporate office and ended up being the head coach of the coaching team that coaches the other 400 trainers like my dad around the world. So within 10 years, I went from being afraid to be a sales trainer to coaching other professional sales coaches and consultants around the world in 19 countries and 27 different languages.
You can't have imposter syndrome and be effective at that. But here's another thing. A lot of salespeople, a lot of sales leaders, Mike, whether they agree to it, come to grips with it or not, they need to be liked. They thrive on being liked, right? The terminology in the industry is you have a high need for approval. You had shared with me before that, that you had that bug before, like I did. Like, how do you deal with that? How do you deal with that situation where you're uncomfortable if you feel like people don't like you while you're working with them?
Well, that's probably the biggest challenge of my life here, Matt. So you said had. I will say that is high need for approval, high need to be liked. Those that know the DISC personality profiles, I'm very much an IES on the people side of things. I don't want to make waves. I don't want to make people upset. I want to be liked. I want to have fun and connect with other people, which is great. And that makes me, I think, a very empathetic, sensitive communicator and leader and coach. But it can also be a danger when I struggle to say the tough things, have the accountability conversations, or, deal with problematic issues between other people, even if I'm not involved. Stepping up to step into difficult situations, rescue people, which is not always the thing that you want to do. But if your team needs rescuing or a deal needs rescuing, there are times where you have to step into a difficult situation or a customer complaint because they want to talk to the manager, right? And you're like, all right, this is it. I got to go fall on the sword on this one. So I got to make a phone call to somebody who's really upset at this moment and see what I can do. And I think I have a few pieces of advice for that. Number one is exposure therapy. I learned this in public speaking and the entertainment stuff that I did, that until you get up on stage in front of 10,000 people, you're going to have stage fright. You're going to be scared. But once you've done it 1,000 times, you might have a little bit of nerves, but it's way quieter in your head than the first time. So I think if you struggle to have difficult conversations, you got to find a way to put yourself in those situations as many times as possible so that you can get the reps, get used to it, and you can get comfortable with being uncomfortable. Number two is, I think you can do this with some really great tactics and questions about being not okay allows the other person to realize that you're in this with them.
So that's the psychology of human communication, basically.
Right. Yeah. That I saw this as a great example one time to tell you how long ago it was, but I'll never forget it. I was in line at a bank and this guy, the check wouldn't clear. The bank had a hold on his money or something. So he was really frustrated. And everybody in line or around, as a customer is like, come on, bank, give the guy his money. Like, what are you doing? Like, this is ridiculous. Just, he's got a check, he got paid or whatever. Like, figure it out. You got plenty of money, right? Until this guy got so upset that he made the cashier on the other side cry. And this poor girl was just like distraught. And then we all switched teams. And we're all like, oh, nope, this guy's an asshole. Don't give him the money. Like, get this guy out of here. Where's security? Like, wrap this up, right? And what that demonstrates is when the power balance shifts, like, it completely changes the game. And so you can do this intentionally, where if a customer is upset and they've been told the corporate policy is we can't do X, Y, Z, and they're frustrated and they're like, well, let me talk to the manager who can change the policy. You're stepping in. Your job is not to go over the top with more policy and come down hard on them or explain to them, or you're going to lose a customer. So your only out, I believe, is to go less okay. It's to struggle with them and say, Matt, I got to really be honest with you. This is the hardest part of my job. I hate making these phone calls. You're upset. I'm not great at dealing with it, but if you tell me what's going on, I'll do my best to help you solve the problem. But I realize that this is going to be uncomfortable for both of us. So Can we get this stuff out here on the table so that we can deal with it as adults? If you come in that way and you just admit that you're not great at this, that look, I have a high need for approval. I don't want to promise you something that I can't deliver, which is my natural tendency, to fix the problem or to be liked and be the hero and swoop in. If I say that's going to be a problem for you, and I really be honest with people, I think that changes the game. It allows
so
me
that's
to
really
be
good.
out.
Exposure therapy, right? Just getting the reps, be doing it, do what scares you. And then, having a toolkit of tactics and techniques that you can leverage in situations to make them more comfortable for you and for the other person involved, right? Powerful stuff. I love the bank reference, right? Because it's kind of funny because, I got the gray hair, I still go to the bank. I still do it.
Yeah.
And my kids are like, what are you doing? So one of them was in town visiting not too long ago, and the mail came, and I still have this tenant from years ago. She's been there forever. She insists on mailing a check for the rent. She won't direct deposit, whatever.
Yeah.
So I'm like, I got to go deposit this check at the bank. And my son's like, what do you do that for? He's like, just here, hold on, give me the check. Give me your phone. Look at he just does a mobile deposit.
Yeah.
I'm like, oh yeah, I kind of knew that was there, but I never use it. He's like, you're going to drive 15, 20 minutes to the bank, deal with that, and then come back. He's like, what's wrong with you? Anyway, we learn from our kids. So speaking of learning, let's talk a little bit about online learning. That's something that we did together a lot in our Sandler days, something we talk about a lot with regard to Coach2Scale now, right? Asynchronous learning. And, there's pros and cons to this, right? Even like ChatGPT is in a way is like online learning, right? What are the pros and the cons when I give you the phrase online learning?
Yeah. So I've thought a lot about this. For 3 years, my role was the vice president of online learning at Sandler. And I built one of their LMS systems that ended up having like 200,000 users in it. So I've thought about this a lot. I've built courses with Cornerstone On Demand and HubSpot Academy and a bunch of other big time L&D people. I think we have to think about the use cases. It'll tie it back to AI for me a little bit in the Ironman Terminator analogy. But I think there are robot jobs and there are human jobs. There are things you can do asynchronously and there are things that have to be done together. And there are insights that you can think about as a knowledge base that we can use, that we can transfer knowledge fairly effectively online asynchronously. Maybe even the way salespeople think about email and stuff, right? If I need to email you a proposal, that's probably a better way to do it than just to tell you everything that's in the proposal, but never send you the document, right? The written document helps organize everything, formalizes it, and it allows them to review it ahead of time and stuff. So I think online learning is great for that. Hey, rep, before our next coaching call, I would love for you to review this clip from the Coach2Scale podcast and think about it a little bit because I want to ask you some questions if that applies to your situation. Great. They get to watch a 10-minute clip ahead of time and then they're prepared and in the right frame of mind with what you're talking about, or you can transfer some knowledge. There's some other things which don't work, which is the behavioral change and the application of stuff. What I found by watching 200,000 people in the Sandler LMS is that they generally look up the topics that they're already good at to reinforce what they believe. Very, very few people who are the top performers anyway look for stuff and go, you know what? I am terrible at that discovery part, or I'm terrible at closing. Let me go look at closing stuff. Most people, and you just look at our algorithms online, right? We want more of what we like and what we feel good about. There's this phrase that my dad used all the time that I love is you can't read the label from inside the bottle. So we can't tell what our problem is without some outside diagnosis. So the Coach2Scale AI is really great at this, but also real humans are great at this. If we get an outside coach to see what we're doing wrong, realize what's wrong with our technique, and then say, hey, go practice this or go learn about this, that'll be better than trying to do it on our own. And then there's this third bucket of problems, which you could put into maybe belief systems or blind spots and stuff that we're just not ever going to fix ourselves. Even if AI tells us to do something, we're like, you don't understand my business, AI. Like, thanks for the recommendation. You don't know. And we're just vehemently against it, or it's our personality. Like we talked about my need to be liked. If you're going to tell me to do something uncomfortable or piss people off, I'm just not going to do it no matter what happens. And that's going to take a real learning intervention of some sort of completely different path, probably some work over months. It might take months or years to change that belief and to really get through those struggles with the other stuff that we talked about, like exposure therapy or practice or continual coaching on a one-to-one weekly basis over
Well,
time to solve.
you, like you said, people flock to what they're already interested in and good at, and they avoid what they may not be good at. And so it takes an outside intervention, i.e. a coach, a leader, to say, hey, Mike, you're really good at all this stuff, but I noticed that you might be struggling with this. Does that make sense? Yeah. Well, let's talk through it. Okay. Here's what I recommend. Basically go do this, go put yourself in this scenario, and let's talk about what you went through, right? You're forcing the exposure therapy and have some accountability around that. Would that be fair?
Yeah. So I think it's not as simple as online or in person or AI coaching or a human coach or sales manager. I think it's different tools for different situations, and it's an all of the above. So I like to think of the spectrum. One of the funniest things I've ever heard, Matt, it was at Yosemite National Park. They were interviewing this park ranger about bears getting into the trash cans and stuff. And the reporter asked, like, you've tried to make bear-proof trash cans. How come that hasn't worked? And he said, well, it turns out there's a considerable overlap between the smartest bears and the dumbest humans. So if we make a bear-proof trash can, we make a human-proof trash can. And the trash just ends up outside for the bears.
That's awesome.
Right? I think about AI kind of the same way. There's going to be, if there is not already, an overlap between AI skill sets and human skill sets. So would AI coaching be better than a bad sales manager? We've all had bad managers that probably, I'd prefer an AI over that person. Would the best AI beat the best human manager? I don't know at this point. I would probably say no. We've all had a life-changing teacher, coach, mentor that just changed a belief and a confidence in you that completely changed the game. And I don't think AI is there anywhere close to that yet. So in the messy middle, we have to think about, like, what Fitbit is great for a reminder to walk, but it's also really annoying when I'm sitting here doing a podcast and it's telling me to get up and move. Well, I can't do that right now, AI. I'm in the middle of something and it doesn't understand the context and stuff. But as I mentioned with Jarvis, there are other times where it pulls out this data and it says, hey, based on your last 50 calls, if you ask this question in your next one, you'll get a much better result. And I go, oh, wow, I've never thought of that before. I'm going to try that. That's a cool insight that nobody else, you or any other human, wouldn't know.
So what I hear you saying in summary on that topic is that online learning can be really good at translating and introducing you to, like, different tactics and techniques that you can use in situations. But when it comes to the mindset, the attitude that we need as a professional salesperson, or when it comes to the behavior and the consistency, the Fitbit, if you will, of sales, online learning doesn't translate that well. Make sense?
Yeah, I think so. And then there's been a lot of misconceptions these days about on-the-job learning and what that means and learning interventions while you're doing it. And I think that's very dangerous. Maybe other people listening to this will disagree, but I don't need Salesforce or HubSpot popping up or Zoom popping up an instruction during my call. I think that's going to throw me off. Now, after the call, if you want to give me some learning interventions and say, hey, next time do this, or better yet, before the call would be great. That's one of the things I hate about human managers, because I had a dad as a sales coach that you mentioned who would go, hey, you know what you should have said in that call was this.
The assumption of when you and the team prepared for this call, did what did you discuss? Did you discuss X? And actually, we didn't prepare for this call, right? So that's what I love about like kind of the way we grew up in this business, is that there's three parts of the sales call. There's the prep, there's the call itself, and there's the debrief. And all of those three make a sales call. And if you miss anyone, you're putting yourself in a dangerous and precarious position. So speaking of all these axioms, in the years that you've been in and around Sandler and in and around sales and coaching and sales leadership, what are a couple of those axioms that resonate the most with you?
That's interesting. There's one Sandler rule that I always say is my favorite, which is the best way to get rid of a bomb is to diffuse it before it blows up. We've kind of already talked about that a little bit with the difficult conversations. Because I have that high need for approval, I've learned that it's a great trap for myself to have those difficult conversations early so that
Mm.
they don't become huge, messy things
Yeah.
later. Right. So, life, in business, in a sales call, if we're going to fight, let's fight up front while it's small. And not
Well,
when
there's a
it's
whole
big.
nother one, right? Don't sweep the problems under the rug. They'll come back to bite you later. And then if we're going to fight early. One of mine was, uh, there's no bad prospects, only bad salespeople, right? Which you could kind of translate that to a lot of different things. No bad kids, just bad parents. No bad dogs, just bad owners, right? All those things. The idea of it is personal responsibility, right? Taking responsibility. You can't blame other people. You can't do the corporate salute. You got to look in the mirror and say, it's my fault. Now, what do I got to do to fix it? So there's a lot of,
The other one that goes right along with it is the biggest fear
oh yeah.
technique that I learned will get me out of a ton of things, which is like, just Matt, how do I tell you up front that my biggest fear in this coaching conversation, this sales call, this podcast is blank? Can we talk about that? And just laying it out there early in a nonchalant thing, again, that is making me in the not okay position. I'm the one that's afraid of this conversation, really was a game changer.
Yeah, there's a lot of those that are game changers. I remember one of them that after like a year or so in my role, I was hinting around to my boss about a raise. And he said, he got where I was going with it. I wasn't direct. And he said, I see where you're going. He's like, look, you're in sales. Your raise will become effective when you do. I was like, huh.
I completely agree. And my dad loved that one too. I think a lot of people in sales do, especially sales managers. The way David Sandler said it is really difficult, but it made more sense to me, which is you earn exactly what you think you're worth, not a penny more and not a penny less. Now that puts the responsibility on you, and it shows you that it's a belief system, not necessarily. So your raise becomes effective when you do as a technique issue. But I think the belief side of that is even more interesting, that there are jobs out there in the world that pay double what you're making right now to do the exact same job, and you've done nothing to go get them. There are jobs that pay less, and you wouldn't take less. If they came and cut your pay, you'd probably go find a new job because you believe you're worth at
Well,
least
that's it. I
this
mean,
much. But for me, the way to change your income is to change that you believe.
and when you believe it, when they say,
you
oh,
deserve it.
Mike, the competition's half of what you're quoting. Okay, that's great. They're a good company. Why don't you just go with them? Right? Like that's
Yeah.
where the mindset comes in. The technique is what you say, but you have to believe what you're worth and the solution that you're offering, right? Really, really good stuff. So let's pivot to what you're doing today. You've alluded to it, Mike, but what are you doing now? Tell me, what's Avenue 9? What really excites you?
Yeah, this was another big change for me, but one of my other roles at Sandler, again, I was there for over 9 years. So it sounds like a lot, but 14 years total in Sandler and 9 at the corporate office. Most of that time I was doing podcasting and content marketing as well. That was the job that I was hired for. I wrote a book on LinkedIn called LinkedIn the Sandler Way. And people can get that for free if you go to sandler.com/LinkedIn.
We'll put that in the show notes if we
It's
can.
available.
Yeah.
It's a PDF. Yeah. And I was doing a lot of social media, a lot of content marketing, a lot of thought leadership, hosting this How to Succeed podcast that you mentioned earlier. And for a long time, that was a lot of work. That was a full-time job. And then I mentioned my last role, I took a promotion to be the head of franchise strategy for the 205 locations, about 400 trainers. And I was still hosting the podcast and stuff, but I didn't have the time to do it. And I started learning how to leverage AI tools to produce all of the stuff that I was still producing in my previous position and be the head of franchise strategy at the same time. And as I was looking at the landscape of things that are going on in the world with AI and how things are changing, I was like, I want to jump in on this. And if I can do the thought leadership, the content marketing, the community building that I was doing for Sandler in a tenth of the time, why shouldn't I do that for 10 companies and try and make 10 times the amount of money?
I'm into that.
Right. So that was the leap that I took about 5 months ago. And it's been really exciting. Also, I think um, we've all been there where I was coaching sales for 9 years, but I was in very few sales conversations. So it started to become like a photocopy of
Yeah.
a photocopy where you're like, maybe I want to practice what I preach. I want to use all the stuff that I've been learning and talking about for the last 14 years and the 800 podcasts that I've done on how to succeed in business and maybe actually succeed in business on my own. So I'm super excited with Avenue 9 to help small and mid-sized companies like build their AI strategy for sales
Excellent
and
stuff.
marketing.
Yeah, and that putting it what you learn to work is super important. And I remember when I left Oracle and joined up with Mike Myers and Colin Lunt, and we started our business. We started working with companies, right, to help them implement a sales process, implement a methodology, right, help them with the how-to in terms of more deals, bigger deals, faster deals, and then with Coach 'em as well. What I loved about what I do is that I got to practice what I preached for so long, every single day. Like what I
Mhm.
was teaching, I was actually using the techniques, if you will, which is super powerful. And I know you're excited and you're doing a great job of that now. So how can people find out more if they're interested, Mike?
Yeah, avenue9.com is the website. If you go to avenue9.com/quiz, there is an AI readiness quiz that leaders can take to challenge your thinking about AI strategy, but also make sure that your organization is prepared for this wave of change that's coming. It's been huge waves already, but there's
Mm.
tsunamis coming. It feels like every single week now with AI and game changing stuff that I think in the next 3 to 5 years, we're going to see super intelligence, like artificial general intelligence that could think and act like a human or solve problems without being programmed to do so, which is going to be an even bigger game changer. But even right now, just the
Yeah.
sales and marketing automation and predictive analytics, all the cool stuff that you can do now, I think you need to get your business and your strategy right around this. If you're still doing a 3 to 5 plan or you got a 10-year horizon on something you're trying to build, you might want to
Exactly.
speed that up a little
What's
bit,
the
in my opinion.
significance of Avenue 9, by the way, the name?
Oh, fun question. Nine, I is the ninth letter of the alphabet. So it's kind of AI are the initials for the company. And new avenues, I think, are being explored all the time. There's some new ways to pursue business that weren't ever available. So I think everybody always has a plan A and a plan B, but who's got an Avenue
Yeah,
9
glad
right
I
now?
asked. I did not know that. Yeah, another little fun thing before we move to close out here. You're also the host of a podcast called Playful Humans. Can you what's that all about and who's interested in that?
It's fun. I always wonder what people think of when they listen to podcasts like this. And I've had a long career. I'm not young anymore, and I've done a lot of fun things. I mentioned that I was a DJ on the radio and I hosted game shows and karaoke shows and all kinds of fun things. And I've always had a passion on the side for performing, public speaking, keynote speaking, all that kind of stuff. I still do that now for AI, but Playful Humans is this project that I started in the pandemic about interviewing people who play for a living, people that are living the dream. They're singers, actors, performers. I've interviewed famous rappers and artists and magicians that fooled Penn and Teller on their TV show, or people that have won America's Got Talent and making cool careers out of things, all the way to just web designers that are digital nomads and they're living in Portugal and
Yeah.
designing websites on the nights and weekends to support their travel blog habit and stuff. And I just find
Ah,
it fascinating. One of my friends is a food blogger, and I was like, wow, this is cool. And after interviewing about 200 of them and reading over 35 books on play and psychology, I put together my own book called Playful Humans, which is available on Amazon. It got a bestseller in the
There you go.
happiness
We need more
category
happiness.
over Thanksgiving. Excited about that. But yeah, it's about beating burnout and boredom. And, sometimes when you're climbing the corporate ladder, you realize that it's not leaning against anything. And there's more ladder if you want it, but there's nothing else up there. And so you got to find
Cool
fulfillment
stuff.
in other
Let's
ways.
we'll throw that in the show notes as well. So let's move to close here. We got a couple of coaching questions, Mike. We are the Coach2Scale podcast.
Yep.
So we bring on guests who care about coaching and developing other people, and usually people who care about that stuff had the behavior modeled for them somewhere along the way. Whose coaching has had a profound impact on how you approach things today?
Well, I would be remiss if I didn't mention my dad. Obviously, he was my sales coach, but he was my basketball coach and my psychology coach from the time I was a young kid. So one of my favorite stories is in preschool. I still remember my earliest memory, probably at this point. A bully was picking on me, and he would take my toy that I was playing with at recess. And my dad said, "Oh, that's easy. Just at the start of recess, go find a toy you don't want to play with. Act like it's the coolest thing in the world. And then when he steals it, go find the toy that you really wanted to play." And it worked.
Oh my gosh.
And I thought, wow, there's something to this. There's something about coaching, psychology, and stuff that this guy knows that's going to be fun. And he would do that throughout my whole life. If we were in high school, there's a lot of peer pressure and stuff. If people were going to a party, he would pull me aside and say, do you even want to go to this party? If you don't want to go, I can say no and I'll be the bad cop. And you can just tell your friends that, sorry, we have family plans and my dad wouldn't let me go. And would take the heat for me on things.
It's great to have
later in business and stuff, just really challenging us too, always wanting what's best for us and pushing us and things. So I think
those are great stories, and it's great. It must have been great to have that type of resource. My grandfather actually did a negative reverse way before I knew what a negative reverse or a pattern interrupt was. And the situation was, I grew up in this really blue collar town, like city, Chelsea, Massachusetts, right near Boston. And my friends were this family, 2 brothers and a sister. And the sister, she was like a little older than me. She was a much better athlete. I mean, she was just stronger. I mean, we were young. We were like, I don't know, 9 years old, 10 years old or something. And I don't even remember how it happened, but I thought she was going to kill me. And so defense mechanism, I grabbed her and I got her in a headlock. And I just held on for dear life, because if I let her go, she was going to kill me. Right. And, whatever's going through your head, my thought at the time was, I don't want to get killed. And I certainly don't want to get killed by a girl. Right. It is what it is. So my grandson was yelling. They're yelling from my grandfather, the 2 brothers, because my grandfather's right down the street, and he comes running up the hill and he looks at me and I'm like, oh, thank God, he's going to break this up. I'm going to get out of here. I'm not going to get my ass kicked. And he's like, Matthew, hit her, punch her. What? Well, I can't hit her. And then he just grabs me by the hair and he pulls me. He's like, first of all, you never, ever hit a girl. But if you were going to fight anybody, you fight. You don't just sit there. And the ultimate pattern interrupt, way before I knew what that was. Don't know why.
Those are funny coaching moments, aren't they? And they sometimes can be life-changing. If you've ever been in a physical fight, you do realize that other people are not playing around. It's not over when you decide it's over. It's over when you both mutually decide it's over. And sometimes not even then. They can come back around again, which is great. I wanted to mention one other teacher that I had, because I think it's a cool story and people can relate to this. And hopefully somebody hears it that needs to. I was a little dyslexic in school and growing up, probably still am, but I always got bad grades in English and stuff because I'd have a ton of misspelling and grammar errors and stuff. And it wasn't until college with spell check and stuff, I had this really great teacher named John Laughlin at Park University. And he said, Mike, you hear the music in words. He's like, I have editors for the newspaper. What I need are storytellers. I need somebody that can get to the heart of it, that understands like the music, the nuance, the narrative of what it is. I'll have somebody else fix it. You just write it. And I was like, oh, that's a game changer. And now I use Grammarly and other AI to proofread everything that I produce. But I've written multiple books that I wouldn't have done without him saying that, I don't think. And at one point I was writing over 10,000 words a week for Sandler. And I haven't looked at my Grammarly stats recently, but it may be over that with AI. now that I produce for myself and my clients. And I wonder if he hadn't recognized the talent in me and changed my perspective about what successful writing was, would I have had the career that I have?
Kudos to him and Steve for recognizing that. Kind of last but not least, we talk about coaching a lot. Who's your favorite coach? Yeah, a name that a lot of people would recognize.
Yeah, I'm in Kansas City, so Andy Reid is not a bad guess, but I think if I was going to pick a coach, this is going to be tough. We might go Dave Ramsey.
All right.
For me, the
coach.
financial advisor.
What about her?
When I was in radio, I got to meet him. He was an incredible guy. He wrote an awesome book called Entree Leadership, and they have a podcast and stuff for it now too. But amazing guy. I think he has the tough love, but he does it with a heart of gold, and he really means, like, it's authentic. I've seen him in radio stations when he's not on the air. A lot of people came through there, a lot of big time rock stars, a lot of young pop stars that thought they were the bomb. And Dave Ramsey was one of the most humble, genuine, patient people, thanking everybody behind the scenes. Really cool guy that I think gives great advice and is a really patient.
And he's given advice on stuff that most of us could really use, which is about finances. You know, it's not about what you make; it's about what you keep.
I'm debt free too. I almost called in the freedom scream.
There we go.
In November.
All right.
When I got everything.
That's awesome. All right. Well, listen, that's a really good place to leave it with financial freedom, debt free. So, Mike, we covered a lot of ground. You know, we talked about it's not having the answers; it's about asking the questions. We talked about, you know, selling people what they need, what they have money for is not cheating. That's what we're supposed to do. You know, you don't need to be liked. You know, exposure therapy, putting yourself out there, getting the reps is super important. We talked about the pros and the cons of online learning. We talked about some axioms that drove us, you know, in this business. And, you know, we talked about AI and what it can mean for salespeople and sales leaders today. So appreciate the energy and the thoughts that you brought to our conversation.
Thanks for having me on.
Awesome.
It was really fun.
Thanks, Mike. And again, thanks a lot to everybody out there watching and listening. If you're out there, let us know you're there. Engage on social media. Let us know what you like. Let us know what you don't like. Let us know what you'd like to see and hear more of. We want to bring content to you that helps you do what you're already doing, helps you do it just a little bit easier. And until next time, coach them if you want to keep them.
We hope you've enjoyed this episode of Coach2Scale, How Modern Leaders Build Coaching Cultures. For show notes and other episodes, visit us at coachem.io. That's COACHEM.io. And follow us on Twitter at CoachemNow. See you all next week. Thanks for joining. And remember, coach them if you want to keep them.